Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hey everybody, welcome to the Behavioral Corner. It's me again, Steve Martirano, right where you left me, hanging on the Behavioral Corner. You know, I hope you do what we do here. We have a big canvas and a broad brush. We talk about behavioral health. That's just about everything. Today, we're going to go to a topic that has fascinated me for a very long time as I've been talking about substance abuse and mental health issues. And that is the role of spirituality, religion, or more broadly put, faith in substance abuse treatment. We'll probably go a little beyond that as well. That's going to be the topic today on the corner. It's a fascinating one. So I figure, who am I going to talk to about this? But my go-to guy, Tom Longenecker. Tom, thanks for joining us again here on the Behavioral Corner. Incidentally, this is your three-peat on the show. I don't think we've called on anybody as often as we've called upon you.
I'm always glad to be with you, Steve. You're always curious and creative, and I'm always eager to hear the things you're thinking about and putting out there. So thank you.
Well, you're kind. You're the guy on this one because for those of you who do not know from Tom from other programs, he is by experience and training, many years of experience and lots of training, a certified counselor, clinician in the field of both substance abuse and mental health issues, in addition to having an extensive background in theology and a degree in divinity. Tom is also an ordained pastor. So that's the intersection I'm looking for. We're talking about faith and its role in substance abuse. You know, Tom, I like to begin, as you know, kind of defining our terms so we're all on the same page. And I got to thinking about faith, and I'm going to do something here I very rarely do and quote scripture. Faith, according to the Bible, is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The evidence of things not seen may be one of the great phrases I've ever read in my life. So let's begin there with faith. When we talk about faith, in what? Faith cannot stand alone. It must be in conjunction with something. So when we talk about faith, what are we talking about?
Well, and I think one of the key things that you bring up in that passage that relates very specifically to substance use and treating substance use is actually where it starts, which is hope. Because when we are working with people who are struggling in addiction, by the time they get to us, hope is usually replaced by despair. And so one of the key aspects, and I think we can lead this over as well into mental health, is the sense of being stuck in something that I can't control, and the sense of this is my destiny, or will I ever get out of this? And so one of the key parts about faith is the ability to hope as opposed to despair. So that's a key thing. Now, your question also led to like hope in. Mm-hmm. And then we have kind of like those three ellipses, those three dots. Okay, what is that going to be in? Because so much of the issue at hand, the existential reality is, despite my successes in other areas of my life, despite my intelligence or power or capacity, my talents, my intelligence, here's an area of my life which I have not been able to overcome by myself. So that faith in, and that's the what you said, the evidence of things not seen. Mm-hmm. I suspect that a lot of faith, a lot of hope requires being able to see something. You still need some kind of vision. When we talk about change, oftentimes there's drivers of change. Why am I ever going to change something about my life? Okay, well, pain is a good driver, and pain can come up. That can look in terms of relationships, employment. That can just I look in the mirror and I see what I don't want to see. So pain can look at a lot of different ways, but that's a pretty good driver. The problem is we can get really stuck in pain and assume this is just what I'm going to be living with. So the other side of what draws people into change is I need to be drawn to change. And so I need to see some things. I need to have some kind of vision that replaces the despair. When I kind of get stuck in that quicksand of despair, I need to be able to envision something that might be feasible. Mm-hmm. That might be something you don't necessarily see. That's one of the benefits, I think, of the rooms, the Fellowship of AA, where people are able, or NA, where people are able to see people who I was on the street with you, and I see this life that you're getting.
Let's talk about the rooms for a minute, because a lot of what we accept as a given with regard to the role of faith in substance abuse issues really comes out of the AA experience. I mean, AA was inspired directly by a religious movement, the Oxford. You know all about this. They very clearly in AA at the beginning, and I guess up to today, talk about in religious terms. They used overtly religious words. They used God at the very beginning. They've now replaced that or morphed it over into whatever that means to you, a higher power. The origins of helping someone in despair who, as you say, has no control, cannot figure out why they're behaving this way, is a religious movement.
Yes.
So let's begin there and talk about the difference between religion and spirituality. Are they the same thing?
I suspect that sometimes we're dealing with semantics. There are certainly big periods of places of overlap, and then I think there are places where we can separate that out a little bit. Religion, religiosity, for better or for worse, is, religious traditions are often the places that have been a haven or places that have passed on certain kinds of spiritual practices, both for good and for ill. When we talk about spirituality, particularly coming out of the 12-step movement, really what we're talking about in a lot of ways is conscious attention and awareness, an awareness of self, an awareness of others, an ability to look at yourself, have some distance from yourself, ability to look inside yourself. And so that, for better or for worse, those are often called spiritual practices. I suspect we could call them existential practices, or I'm sure we have other words that would probably fit. Their connection with religion is that people can be religious and not engage in those practices hardly at all. But those religious traditions or wisdom traditions have often been the carriers of those very practices that are attentive to the inner self, to the inner life, and relationships with others, both relationship with myself, relationship with others, and then a kind of relationship with the greater world. And in some ways, people talk about the great other, the self that is not me.
Yes.
Okay, and that's where we talk about things like God, higher power, oftentimes.
I'm going to be sort of, and I hate to use this phrase in the context of our discussion, but I may have to be the devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
To understand this a little bit better. Basically, as I understand this, as I experience it, these stories about the world outside of us and something bigger than me, and have faith in that idea, are stories we tell ourselves. We've been telling these stories since we could imagine. And these stories have great, great power. And question is, when you're in a substance abuse situation, are they, on some level, these stories and a belief in these stories, a faith in these stories, absolutely essential to getting better?
Yeah, I mean, have
you treated atheists?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly. And actually, I think I don't know what the percentage would be, but I think a large number of our people are at the very least ambivalent about the idea of existence outside of what I see. Okay.
Right, because what they see is so bad and so immediate that there can't be anything else going on, right?
Sure. So in our context, I'm not necessarily drawing on, scriptural texts from any of the religious traditions necessarily. I mean, it doesn't mean that we necessarily ignore them, but we're not necessarily prioritizing them either. Partly because I think it can be very confusing, and religious traditions have done so much wounding that's not necessarily going to be a healing path at this point in a person's life.
Yeah, one of the things that's often overlooked when you talk about the religious, for instance, the religious origins of something like AA, is that you're right, the religious traditions and beliefs also have gone a long way towards demonizing and stigmatizing people with these problems. We've fortunately moved away from the notion that you're sinful if you're an alcoholic, to you're sick, you have a problem. But the idea of sin, I guess, is counterproductive in this whole discussion, right?
Well, I think part of the is kind of deconstructing some of the words that people have. because that word is really packed. It just carries a lot of weight.
Mhm.
In some ways, we do an awful lot of actually naming sin, which is just brokenness. I missed the mark here. I mean, in terms of like kind of a more literal interpretation of that word, at least in the biblical context.
Mhm.
But one of the things, we don't want to is give a sense that my struggle with substance use is something that is itself a that damns me as a person, as a my essential worth.
Yeah, I
Okay.
understand that completely. But what I need in my mind, for me anyway, because I'm kind of stupid here, is how do you reconcile the two things?
Mhm.
If faith is important in something, whatever, but to think of your behavior or circumstance as being sinful is counterproductive. How can you rely upon faith to help you if you're sick?
Mhm.
For instance, how much faith is necessary for somebody who has diabetes or cancer, where there's no stigma or moral problems?
Certainly. And the thing is, like, when we talk about addiction, we talk an awful lot about spirituality in some form, often very vague. But if I have cancer and I go to the doctor, they're not necessarily going to prescribe me to pray,
Right.
right?
Well, not if they want to keep you as a patient, that's for sure.
Correct, correct. Now, there is other kind of research that suggests there are certain benefits of spiritual practices and relating to a community and that kind of thing that give people greater power and agency when they're when they're living with cancer. But I think we also need to make kind of a distinction between what it is to be healed and what it is to be cured.
Ah,
Okay. And maybe this can kind of bring us back a little bit. If I am cured of cancer, I get a clean bill of health, no more metastasizing, it's cleared out. That doesn't necessarily heal me. My body might be cured, but my relationship in my family, my ability to be available to my community, my kind of investing in life, that might lag behind. That might not happen.
yeah, your relationship to mortality would be shattered for one.
Sure,
Right?
sure. But it is possible actually not to be cured of cancer and actually heal. And there's all these kind of stories where because of cancer, because I'm facing into mortality, I look at these things very differently and relationships get restored. And so healing happens. Okay. And I think we need to kind of bring that back also to the issue of substance use. Again, it's unlikely somebody is cured. There's a there's a chronicity, there's an ongoing kind of tendency that always lurks around the corner with addiction. But great healing is possible.
Mhm.
So believing and trusting in the process, and this is the thing we actually talk about, probably much more than sin or faith, is trust the process. Can you trust the process? You come in at this level of care, and the world is falling apart. I have a pretty dim view of myself and maybe others. There's a lot of shame, and I don't see that I'm going to stick around here. And we say, trust the process, trust the process, be part of the process. And there's a level of faith with that, which, okay, I don't see this. I don't know why this would work. But if I put myself into the process of, I come to these places, I start to talk about myself, I start to put into practice some of these steps or some of these other projects, I start to find these kind of grounding skills or centering skills. And then you start to see, and then after a while, okay, I've trusted the process. I'm actually putting some faith, some trust.
In one sense, I think it's a stronger connective word than faith, which can put some people off. I know you've talked to many, many people whose first experience with AA was off-putting for them because they found it to be a little too faith-based. Put your faith in this. So it sounds like what's going on here is a worldly turn away from this notion of a superpower somewhere off in the skies. And as you said, a process that you should have faith in because it's worked for many people. That's where the faith comes in, that you're trusting the process, as we say here in Philadelphia.
Sure. I'm trusting some accumulated wisdom.
Right.
And people kind of pass on, accept this or reject it. but if I can try a little bit of it, I'm actually venturing out in some trust. Okay. Why would you trust? So I'm trusting this person. I'm trusting this person's story. I'm trusting what I'm starting to see. I'm trusting what I want to believe.
Yeah.
Doing something different.
And all of those words, trust, faith, and all of that are, I guess, in a way, what AA refers to as a higher power. In other words, what you've been doing has gotten you in this spot. There are ways you should be behaving now that you have to have faith will work, and that's outside you. So is that what they mean when they say a higher power, something?
Well, I think since we're talking about the 12 steps, I'm just thinking about how they really are built around power. So the first step is we admitted that we were powerless over, in this case, alcohol, let's say, that our lives have become unmanageable. And so at that point, people are actually identifying a power greater than myself.
Mhm.
I've not been able to mend this. I've not been able to kick this. I've not been able to really work with this. It is greater than me by myself. So we're already talking about a higher power at that point. That's just one that's going to kill you. And then the second step they talk about is came to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. So again, the 12 steps really do work around the idea of power. And at that point, they're only talking, very vaguely about power. And then they become much more overt. Okay, made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God. So again, the care of God would be the trust of God, trust of a power greater than me that can tilt the scales towards healing and life as opposed to death.
Yeah, here's how the cynical mind works, and one that's trapped in the disease of addiction. Well, wait a minute. That higher power you talked about must have had something to do with me being in the shape I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I take all the blame and then turn for this higher power for help? Where was the higher power when I was abusing drugs?
Certainly. And if you look in the early 12-step literature, it was even much more overt. They actually started to kind of wean out wanting to refer to things like higher power because, some of just all the ills that people have around that language, because language around God, language around spirit, language around that kind of thing tends to have a lot of weight.
Mm.
You look at all the sexual abuse that occurs in church contexts. That occurs in all kinds of other places too, families elsewhere, but it has additional weight because of the trust, because of the just kind of the role that those institutions play, because they really do reach at people's kind of wholeness, their inner parts and their outer parts, and this. So there's a lot of baggage. There's a lot of stuff around that. So the AA movement back in the early days started to try to move away from some of that God language, but it's still very, very overt.
Yeah.
So part of that is, people say, okay, what is a higher power to you that can give you life? So some people can say, oh, okay, it's my group. I look around these people and I find myself leaning towards life. I think that, this helps me get out of some of the thoughts in my head.
Mhm.
So that can function. People can believe in, some kind of God figure and not even claim that as their higher power.
Or have no belief in any
Or
supernatural.
have no belief,
Yeah.
certainly no belief.
Yeah,
Right.
what's interesting about the strength of community, which is the bedrock of AA, is that there is, we talk about evidence of things not seen. Well, this is a situation, it seems to me, where evidence is clearly seen. The group, the community, the substance abuser was in while abusing was reinforcing the bad behavior, progressing it, making it worse. And so the idea is to find yourself in a different community where they value and support positive behavior, and you gain strength from that. I get that completely.
I think part of the, people can go a long way in recovery and work at the issues that have driven addiction, have driven substance use and abuse, and move a long way into recovery before they really actually never ever actually have to kind of deal with kind of theological kinds of issues about the existence of God in whatever way people are going to determine them. And again, I think a lot of, some of the early AA, when they talk about God as you understand God, I think a lot of that, they were responding to, we were taught these creeds, we were taught these statements about God, and we don't have to accept those. The other part of that is, I don't know that we ever move beyond believing in a God that is beyond our own understanding. That's the
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
that's always the God that we believe in. The God
okay.
that even the God I don't believe in is still the God of my understanding.
Exactly right.
Right?
Tom Longenecker is our guest. Tom is a clinical supervisor at Retreat Behavioral Health. They, of course, are our underwriting partners. He is also, as I mentioned earlier, an ordained minister, and he has a degree in divinity, a theological background. So he's the perfect guy to talk to about faith in the role of substance abuse. So it's a interesting concept. You're right about the weightedness of the religious notions. God is a loaded word. Higher power is just another way of, I guess, taking some of the load off of that term. Let's talk about a couple of practical things. For instance, in your role as a clinician, have you ever prayed with someone over the issue of their substance abuse?
Certainly, but only when they've requested it.
They request.
Yeah. Now, the other part is, actually, when we lead a lot of meetings, we end with a Serenity Prayer. So I guess I would say that
Every meeting.
there's lots of meetings where I've been part of where we've closed with prayer. Yeah.
Serenity Prayer is, I should memorize it by heart now, but it does mention God immediately. But I think the essence of it is just let me be wise enough, strong enough to know the difference between things I can change and things I can't change. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a divine intervention. You just want to be able to go, well, that's not good, and this is good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the most likely composer of that prayer was a man named Reinhold Niebuhr.
Yes.
Um,
Yes,
I
he's the author of it, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I forget if he taught at Yale or he taught at Union in New York. His brother taught at one and he taught at the other. I don't remember which one.
It was at Yale.
Okay. But there he's tries to kind of lay out what are the parameters of freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
limitation and freedom need, to understand freedom, we need to understand limitation as well.
right. When the path diverges, I would hope that I can be in a position to choose the right path.
Right. And so, and that speaks so directly to the struggle with substance use, which is the kind of the self-decrying, self-loathing egomaniac. Okay. In my addiction, I both carry the weight of the world. I see myself as both, degraded and so some of this is simply just kind of working with the load of ego. What is the constraint? What is the right relationship of ego in my own life? The right relationship of my ego in social relationships and in the broader world. And so I think that's part of why that has really caught on, because so much of the work around addiction is really coming to terms with myself.
Yes. Is that the strongest role that faith plays in this process? Because I've heard people say stopping the use of what it is you're abusing is just the beginning of solving the problem. The other problem is all the things you just described. And those things have to be addressed on a more personal and, I guess, faith-based idea. Is that where faith is strongest? Because look, you can't pray your way out of a heroin. You're going to want heroin. You're going to want to drink. But once you stop doing that, then you need faith that you can keep stopping, right?
Well, and again, I think this leads us back to these practices that religious or wisdom traditions have carried to us. I always make the distinction that one person is abstinent. Abstinence is not the same as sobriety. Some people can drink, some people can use pot, and it does not make them irrational. Okay, they're able to live their lives. They're able to be grounded. Some people not so much. Okay. And so I usually kind of try to phrase it that abstinence is the prerequisite for sobriety, but sobriety is a whole different thing. So once we stop using, and I work in a medical facility that has means to assist people medically to get through just a lot of the physical and to some degree some of the emotional and mental issues that kind of surround withdrawal. But beyond that, there's a whole other world that is opened up, and I think this is the thing where we can really kind of make a strong connection between a secular approach and one that values, again, some of those spiritual practices or existential practices, because one of the things we do an awful lot around is slowing the brain down. Okay. So we do a lot of work around meditation, contemplative prayer. We also will work around just other kind of grounding skills. And because one of the key things is we want to, oftentimes, a traumatized brain is a brain that really is being driven by the limbic system.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do is slow things down so that the limbic system, which is something that saves us much of the time by reacting, but when we live our lives out of reactivity, that's not serving us well. We want to slow the brain down so that it can then use the higher functions of the brain, where we are able to get into things like the great values that drive us, our longer term goals. That's where we're able to conceive of things like beauty, imagination.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're able to conceive of things like God, or for my sister's Beyonce, who I think is probably about the same. My daughter's rather. Um, but part of what we do is those are the practices that slow that down. And when the other thing is, through time, as we do those certain kinds of practices, it actually changes the brain. So there's the neuroplasticity part of the brain.
Yes.
That these practices are essential and key in allowing us to think differently, and by thinking differently, to be different, and to be able to then sustain our lives without jumping to other ways to save us.
Yeah, as you know, in the world of substance abusers and clinicians, the aphorism is the fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another way of saying behave the way you wish you could behave, and then soon enough you will be that person. So let me ask you very specifically, though, about a couple of these other things. I read a lot and now see advertisements for faith-based treatment. You've talked a little bit about the difference between treating somebody in a secular fashion
Mm-hmm.
and in a faith-based fashion. Do you have a problem with an organization that says they have a faith-based system for treating substance abuse, specifically a Christian faith-based program? Is that problematic in your mind?
I think it raises questions that programs like that need to be aware of. I think that they can be, and I'm aware of some that are strong and have good track records. I think it raises some of the question, which goes to the core, which is, what is my essential worth and value? And one of the problems with religiously driven programs is it can feed the idea that if I do this right, if I get all this right, and I believe the right things, then I will be saved. And I'm using the word saved in, well, actually, no, I'm using the word saved in all the many ways that it could be used. It comes from the Latin word salve, which is, like, again, healing.
Yep.
Okay, salve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is, and it's the problem that we see also in the 12 step in anywhere, which is, if I do all this right, and I maintain this facade of maybe not perfection, but rightness, but that's just one more means of escape from myself. And so I think that's one of the problems that those programs have to deal with, because they can easily play into that idea. Whereas the truth is, so much of recovery is about recognizing my brokenness and accepting it for what it is, and it doesn't define me. And I keep moving on honestly and speaking the truth that I'm learning about myself.
In your experience, do people who have strong beliefs, whether they be religious or spiritual, have a better chance of healing themselves than people who, don't understand the notion of a higher power, or much less a God? Do people who have something like that in them to begin with, do they have a better chance of getting well?
That's a great question. And I think the issue is there's just so many complex things that come along. I think for many people, if they can find resources in their religious tradition, that can be one more buffer. And that can be prayer, that can be service, that can be connection to their congregation or synagogue or mosque. It can be part of their sense of a gracious God and a greater merciful universe that is abundant, that wants to receive them and welcome them into a life that they have not yet even imagined for themselves. So that's always a possibility. It doesn't always play out that way. for people who are just rejecting and more of a reductionistic approach, I think one of the key things to always develop is this idea that I am moving through a process. I can't necessarily control the ends. Whether we're talking, because people can still use God talk and be very invested in controlling the ends. It doesn't, that kind of language doesn't necessarily make you more akin. I mean, religion can both provide a really strong community. It can provide all these practices and resources that have very lots of strength and provide stability and insight. But they can also just be more tribalistic. And this is just a place where I go to reaffirm my sense of my own rightness or the world as I see it. So the God talk by itself is not enough. But people who don't have that kind of God talk, certainly, but part of what we have to work with is some kind of sense of, and I think it comes back to the very first questions you asked. Can I believe in something that I don't see? Can I trust that there's good that comes to me outside of myself?
Yeah, it's a great insight. And you're one of the first people I've noticed that made that distinction about the means and the ends. I mean, the expression is the ends justify the means. In this case is you can say what you like about the ends. You can say it's God or religion, but as long as you're in control of the means, what you're doing, how you're doing it, you'll get to that positive outcome if you're very, very lucky. Boy, this is a great topic, Tom, and you are the perfect guy to talk about this. Finally, to anybody who might be listening who is hesitant to get help because they think this is, I don't know, cultish or too God-centered, what would you say to them to sort of nudge them along?
I guess part of the question is, do you like where you're at? Would you like something different? Can you believe in something? Can you believe that something is possible? That's not what I've known. At some level, I mean, maybe that's a little bit a summarization of just what you and I've been talking about, because that really does talk about trust and faith at some level.
Well, that's the ultimate faith question.
Right?
You know what? I know how you feel about God and all that, but why don't you come and sit down and we'll talk about this. If you have enough faith for that, you're on the road anyway. At least you're taking the first step. Tom Longenecker, a clinical supervisor, Retreat Behavioral Health, very busy guy. Appreciate his time. Let's do this again. This topic is fascinating.
Gladly. You know how to get a hold of me. I'm always glad to hear what you're talking about and what you're curious about, Steve. Thanks for the good work you do.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you guys for hanging with us. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and all those other places you follow us. And we'll see you next time on the Behavioral Corner.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.